Oscar, I think we might just head on to the defenders now, because we have spent a lot of time nattering over the front area of the park. Now onto the defenders we go, where the list is Nathaniel Atkinson, Aziz Beige, Milos Degenek, Thomas Deng, Fran Karasic, Bailey Wright, Harry Suter, Kai Rolls, and Joel King. And I think I quite like the way we've gone from front to back, because I do think the further back you get in this squad selection, the more questions start to appear. Now, the biggest one so far has been Joel King, selected as a second left back behind Aziz Beige, despite maybe not playing as many minutes as other players who have managed to crack or been in contention for that left back slot. It really feels like that's ruffled a few feathers.
It's kind of where I've credited Graham Arnold for being consistent with his professed philosophy for picking this squad in the midfield and forward parts of the pitch. And then once we get to the defenders and indeed the goalkeepers even, we start to enter this realm of where, like, the philosophy's kind of gone out the window in a way that makes this a very confusing squad. And I don't really understand how we've kind of got a bit of half and half of half predictable Saif Arnie and half adventurous, sticking by his word. Who's
torn
playing
between his ideals.
I really feel like he almost is in this sense. I mean, it is complicated by the uncertainty that exists around the vast majority of defenders and their fitness in this squad in a way that creates this dynamic of uncertainty and confusion inherently. I will point out for you what a strong win the defenders' selections is for the Hearts brand in particular.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great Scottish football squad. It's a great squad if you are an Australian who supports Hearts. I think there's about 10 of us. So dancing in the streets for 10 people who fit that very niche subcategory.
That is Graham Arnold's target audience. That's very...
He's taking his time, but finally he's speaking my language. I like it.
He's finally feeling able to express himself in this position, and that's actually what he's been getting at throughout his whole tenure, is he's really wanted to put Hearts at the front and
this
centre.
whole time. How do I win over Lachie Flannigan in South Yarra?
That's right.
What will the Lachie Flannigans of the world think? No, that's not true. He definitely has not paid any attention and hasn't paid a lot of attention to the outside noise about some of these selections. And I do want to narrow in on Joel King. A friend of the station, Damir Kulash, posted a big thread about match minutes for various players. Joel King's selection is not the only question in this defensive category. You've mentioned the injuries. You've mentioned some of the logic that's been applied to make selections. But Graham Arnold has certainly, in the lead up to this World Cup, made match minutes a big importance. It's why it's the logic we've seen to have some of the other players in this squad selected. It's certainly helped Jason Cummings. It's certainly been a benefit to Keanu Bacchus. But you look at some of the left-back options who were in the conversation. You've got Jason Davidson, who's played 1,243 minutes, 14 starts across 16 games. Alex Gersbach, just over 1,000 minutes with 11 starts across 12 games played. Aziz Beige for Dundee, 958 minutes, but starting every single one of the games in which he's played in Scotland. Callum Elder clocks in at 927 with 11 starts in 13 games. Joel King for OB, Odense Bold Club, 291 minutes, 3 starts and 6 games played. So of those left-back competitors, very much at the sort of back end, and particularly for someone like Jason Davidson, who I'll admit was in my Socceroos squad, who's been playing while he's been at CAS, Eupen in Belgium, has not just played as a left-back, but also functioned as a centre-back when the need be. I think he's hugely unlucky to miss out. Hugely.
And we can't even rationalise the selection of Joel King by saying, well, Joel King has this renowned extra level of quality that none of those other left backs that you just listed have, that he's just far and away the best. And so in that case, we'll make an exception. That's not true. And so I that's probably the second most confusing selection in this whole squad.
And if anything, I actually think a lot of the names that were in contention for the left-back position, their attributes are quite similar.
Yeah,
they're not substantially different players.
I don't see the differentiation that Joel King brings that would justify overlooking the lack of match minutes compared to those competing for the same position.
Yeah, it's a big surprise. It's a big surprise. I guess there are some more cynical people that would perhaps suggest to you that it isn't all that much of a surprise. But look, it's. I think for the most part, Arnie has got the decisions right. This is maybe, I think, we can let him have a mulligan or two in the squad. This is maybe one where it's like, well, should we really be letting our national team manager get away with it? Maybe not, but I don't have the authority to actually lead my,
down the law.
my issues with Joel King being selected to actually do anything. So it kind of feels like we're yelling at the void. But yeah, he is one of the biggest surprises of this squad. Certainly one of the biggest winners. Tom Deng makes it in seemingly as a centre back selection who can function as a right back if need be.
I'm a big fan of picking Tommy Deng. I like Tommy Deng.
Of Trent Sainsbury.
Yes.
Is that going to make it a bit awkward at the Arnold family Christmas party at the end of this year?
It would, wouldn't it? I don't know how it can't. Regardless of how easily Graham let Trent down in this process, that's going to be in the back of his mind for the rest of his life. That's something that they're going to live with for the rest of their lives.
Ooh, he has been a figure who has, I think, increasingly come under public questioning, and I guess in public scrutiny as to his position within the Socceroos squad. He did have a couple of poor games at, I think, not an ideal time in a national team shirt. Couple that with the fact that he hasn't been playing for the last few weeks because his season in the Middle East came to an end. He's been training with Melbourne City just to sort of keep fit, but nothing more than that because of his contract situation.
But it's the Jekyll and Hyde of this squad. This is another case in which, all right, we've got consistency with the professed rationale. That there it is. That makes sense. We see it, as you say, he hasn't been playing competitive football for the last couple of months. Okay, cool.
But then in the same position, you have Harry Suter and Kai Rolls. Kai Rolls came off the bench, played 4 minutes in the thrilling 3-2 win over Motherwell for Hearts on Monday night. But he played 3 minutes. It was his first game for, I think, 2 to 3 months. And yet Sainsbury is out because he hasn't played the required match minutes.
It's kind of like, it's like...
Suter, I don't think has managed to... Yes, he's played a handful of games now in the under 23s, I think, for Stoke in the youth side. But I don't think he's managed a full 90.
It's like Arnie's on this.
So the Jekyll and Hyde isn't in the squad. It's just in one position selection.
It's like he's on a diet, Graham Arnold. He set himself some strict regulations, and these are his cheat meals that he's having. It's just every once in a while he's just breaking.
He's giving himself the mulligans now. We don't need to give him the pass.
I'll allow myself that one. Oh, okay, you deserve it. You've been good with the rest of them. We'll balance is key in this case.
Just one more from the box of favourites.
Right.
That flake. It feels like it needs some love. I feel like
king size. That's the one.
What
for me,
favourite what do you reckon Graham Arnold's favourite chocolate from the box of favourites is? It's Bounty.
Why do you go Bounty?
It's just not everyone's favourite. I feel like maybe Graham Arnold would like that.
Picnic.
Maybe Boost. Boost feels like the most pace and power kind of chocolate.
But it's skinny and short.
I'm mainly just going off the name. We're probably giving it more analysis than it actually needs.
I'm saying a picnic is this girthy, crunchy,
tough. A picnic
tough.
looks like it could do a job at Central Defence. It's the Harry Suter of the favourites box.
The Miloš Degenek? I don't.
Sure.
I'm
sure.
These are the questions.
Like I said, probably giving it too much analysis than is actually necessary. But yeah, it does sort of underscore the mixed application of logic to selections in this squad. But I think on the whole, it's a pretty good defence. Like if Harry Suter was fully fit, and hopefully he will be better when the time the World Cup comes around. Even though it's not that long, he is a lock to start. Kai Rolls would heavily be in the conversation. Trent Sainsbury, I don't think has been good enough to merit a selection, whereas Bailey Wright started, I think he has had 3 consecutive full 90s for Sunderland. I still feel like even if there are inconsistencies in the thought process that's led to some of these players being selected, I think with the exception of Joel King, the selections are pretty fair. I do want to say though, Nathaniel Atkinson gets selected. Frank Karasic's also picked. I think we might talk as we get to the end of this squad about sort of the big winners and losers. I think one of the big losers out of all of this is Ryan Strain. I think he is massively stiff to miss out on going to the World Cup. Again, another player who has been playing in Scotland, but for those of you who haven't watched any of St Mirren, Ryan Strain has been a standout in that right back slot. He's probably been one of, if you look at FOTMob, the average ratings on FOTMob, but I know that's not necessarily the most reliable indicator, but he's one of the top 20 players in Scotland at the moment. I think he'd definitely be in the top 30 to 40 based on what I have seen. Certainly one of the leading players in his position this season. He scored a cracking free kick goal against St Johnstone, albeit in a loss on the weekend, and has had a couple of assists too, particularly that one that we saw him set up for Keanu Bacchus when he scored his first St Mirren goal. He's been really good, and I actually think he's performed well more consistently than Nathaniel Atkinson this season. I still think Nathaniel Atkinson has a higher ceiling.
That was literally the question I was going to ask.
He's got a higher ceiling, but his performances in a Hearts shirt since he's joined the club have actually been, from what I've seen, quite inconsistent. The good has been really, really good, particularly going forward, but defensively extremely suspect on a lot of different occasions. And I do think this is one of the situations where we know Arnie is someone who does place a high value on his personal relationships. I do think this is a situation where Ryan Strain is a bit of a victim of the fact that Nathaniel Atkinson is someone who's got a very strong connection with Graham Arnold. He's the kind of player that Graham Arnold likes. He's also got that ability to also play as a winger or as a midfielder if need be. I don't like him in either of those positions. I think he should solely be a right back. But he's got that going for him, and he's also been through the youth team that Arnie managed as well. And Arnie does want to reward people who have shown faith in him, who have delivered for him. I also don't think he's been very convincing either when he's actually played for the Socceroos. But I think if we were picking on form, I think Strain would go ahead of Atkinson. I would select Strain ahead of Atkinson, but I do think this time he's lost out because of maybe some non-footballing factors.
I suppose the counter-argument and the reason that I would pick Atkinson over Strain was I said I was going to ask you the question of who has the higher ceiling, and the reason for me that's relevant is I guess the justification for which players you're picking in this squad. I think we're planning for the starting that sentence again
for the next cycle.
No, that's not where I was going to go. I was going to go, what's the best that the Socceroos can put out? And I think that Nathaniel Atkinson is more likely to be part of the Socceroo side, which is the best that the Socceroos can put out, than Ryan Strain is. And I think insofar as that's the case, I think it's worth the punt on Nathaniel Atkinson, in a way that I accept if Ryan Strain has been more consistent and more reliable this season, which based on all the evidence he has been, I think that the fact that Nathaniel Atkinson has a higher ceiling means that Graham Arnold sees that as a higher level functioning of the squad as a whole, and that's worth taking that risk on.
Okay, I think we'll for the purposes of brevity, agree to disagree on that one. I say as we get into our 40th minute of
Turkish Delight, by the way. I reckon Graham Arnold would like Turkish Delight.
See, I think Turkish Delight is actually underappreciated and gets a pretty bad rap.
That's because they're the worst in the box.
I disagree. I think Turkish Delight is the hipster's chocolate, and that's why I actually think that Graham Arnold wouldn't.
I feel like Turkish Delight be interested in the
like the geriatrics chocolate.
I didn't want to say it, but yeah, sure, that one, yeah.
I feel like it's either or. But for me, Graham Arnold doesn't fit into either of those categories. He's definitely not. Okay, maybe it's easier to do this by process of elimination.
Okay.
Graham Arnold, definitely not a Marvelous Creations man.
No.
Doesn't like it, in his midfields and in his chocolate, does not like Marvelous Creations.
Do you reckon? I don't think he's cherry ripe.
No.
No.
Now we've got to remember what's in the favourites box.
I think I've got the list here.
I think Morrow, that might be a shout for Arnie's favourite.
Well,
it's an unremarkable, it's a reliable chocolate in most people's eyes, but it's not spectacular.
Surely Graham Arnold would be the Mars bar to Steve Corica's Morrow or something like that. There's a relationship there that exists. I don't feel like Morrow's the head honcho in that family of chocolates.
Again, giving it far more analysis than is required, as we're doing with this Socceroos squad, although in this case very much required. As we move on to the goalkeepers, where one of the low-life leakers, he's not actually a low-life, he's a very nice guy, and if you believe some reports, also a billionaire, Vince Regari announced in the early hours of this morning that Mitch Langerak had been left out of the Socceroos squad. And while we all sort of joked that it might be funny if after all this furor that broke out online that Mitch Langerak ended up in the Socceroos squad, anyway, he did not. Andrew Redmayne, Matt Ryan and Danny Vukovic, the three selected. Now, Oscar, there are a lot of different interpretations of this situation. Most people thought that this was the area of the park in the Socceroos squad over which there was almost no debate. Everyone was pretty much agreed that the trio would be Ryan, Langerak, Redmayne, because Redmayne's the third keeper. Stick him around for the penalties. Mitch Langerak's been the best performing, and Matt Ryan is in some people's eyes, unquestionable, in my eyes, questionable, starting Socceroos goalkeeper, as he has been for a while. But the sting in the tail of this Socceroos selection story was that Mitch Langerak wouldn't be called up. Danny Vukovic going in his place. Certainly this stirred up some online controversy. It ruffled more than a few feathers. Are we... Soccer Twitter has, and just Australian football in general, we do have a habit of going into far more detail and despairing far more about things than we actually need to sometimes. Have we done the same thing here with a freak out over a potential reserve goalkeeper in the Socceroos squad?
I think for me the main mitigating factor is that had Mitch Langerak been selected, I didn't expect him to see a minute, barring injury to Matty Ryan. For me, that's the one thing that I can take away and I guess makes it less severe in my mind is I can't imagine, except barring injuries and barring a penalty, that anyone other than Matty Ryan would be in that goalkeeper position during our World Cup campaign. That's the only thing I can offer. Outside, have we overreacted? I think the reaction is largely in a non-footballing sense, in a personal sense, to someone who, by all reports, is a wonderful human being in Mitch Langerak, who, of course, has also been performing on the pitch, but having been coaxed out of Socceroos retirement by Graham Arnold, encouraged to come back, to have committed to doing so, and to then not see the pitch and not be selected in the World Cup squad, I think is personally and morally upsetting, turpituitous in a way that I think is stronger than the footballing argument.
Well, it was interesting as well in the aftermath. This was an area of the pitch that Graham Arnold was questioned about pretty strongly, and rightly so, given the discussion of the day about Langerak's non-selection. And he did say that the goalkeeping coach for the Socceroos, John Crawley, had a very heavy influence over the decision of these goalkeeping squads. And I think Crawley has had a previous connection to all three of the goalkeepers who ultimately have been selected. Now, I'm not suggesting or insinuating any foul play there, but I do think it's odd that Graham Arnold, I mean, he is the manager of the Socceroos. He has got overwhelming, to an extent. He's not a dictator. He is employed by someone else. But where it relates to footballing decisions, he is the alpha and omega of what should be picked. To publicly come out and say, well, these were my goalkeeper coach's selections, particularly when Langerak's form in Japan has been so good that he has been asked to come out of retirement before. He's worked himself into the conversation. He's set and broken clean sheet records, which is not all down to him, but a large part of it is. That's a pretty big omission to make from a squad that was supposed to be, this was the World Cup where club form had never been more important. Pretty big omission in that context, but also interesting that he chooses to palm that off as not his decision. I don't know. I wasn't a huge fan of the way that was handled, or if that's genuinely how it was handled. I'm not a huge fan of the goalkeeper coach, even though they probably are the best placed, being the one left to make that decision, because I think it is Arnie's, it should be the decision of the national team coach to pick the goalkeepers regardless of the recommendations that are made to him. And I mean, Mitch Langerak has been so good in Japan. It just feels like, especially in the context of the whole coming out of retirement thing to play when he was asked to, it feels like a slap in the face.
And not only should it be Graham Arnold's decision, I think I agree with you on that, but I also think, I think it is, even if, and I'm quite happy to believe that John Crawley made this decision. That seems like I believe that.
Yeah, it seems logical.
It seems reasonable. Well, I say reasonable, it seems believable. But I don't think it is reasonable for Graham Arnold to therefore deflect some kind of responsibility for that decision, which is what I saw that as a move in recognising the outrage and the disappointment, and to then say, well, that's not my decision. It's this very, we could make some broader point about it being a problematic trope in Australian football as a whole, and the handballing of responsibility. And we've managed to include all sorts of references in the space of a couple of sentences, but it can't not fall back to Graham Arnold. I don't know how Graham Arnold hasn't taken it on himself to explain that decision in some capacity, rather than simply delegate it to someone else and say, well, it was their responsibility, so don't come at me for it.
And also it's just not, I guess this is a bit adjacent to the point that you're making. It's also just not true. Like yes, he's made those recommendations to you, you've acted on them, but ultimately the decision-making power of selecting this squad is in your hands. If he makes recommendations to you, if you choose to take those on board, that's not his, that's actually not his decision. That's your decision. If you choose to stick by him in making those recommendations to you, well, yes, he's picked those players out, but you've chosen to back him in. And, you've put maybe your potential thoughts about who should go to one side because you want to back in your man. If you are standing by him and you're standing by his decisions, I don't think it's a very good look to then throw him to the wolves. Even though no one's really, realistically, he's not actually being thrown to the wolves, because John Crawley's not someone who's going to front the media and ask questions about why the reserve goalkeeper for the Socceroos isn't, or the one that we expected isn't being selected. But I think you've got to own it. I think you've got to give some justification, because what people wanted with this situation was answers as to why that happened, and just saying, well, someone else made this decision, when really that's not true. You've taken his advice and made a choice to take his advice. It's actually not an answer. It's not an answer. It's not an excuse, but it's a deflection.
And it is a decision, as you've said.
Yeah.
But that's the decision to follow.
Even if your decision is to take someone else's advice, you've made that call.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think people deserve, even if it's something as inconsequential as a player who may not have started, I still think people have a right to know. And no one's going to come after John Crawley to find that answer. At least I don't think so. I would have liked to have had a bit more transparency, if not from Graham Arnold, from John Crawley, as to how that decision was made. Even if it's an off-pitch thing, even if it's a squad harmony thing, I don't really care. I think, and I don't think necessarily deep down in their heart of hearts, many people as have made commentary about it online today, care that deeply.
No.
But I still think they have a right to know. I mean, we're not that far removed from the days of, I think it was the 2010 World Cup squad, where it was the squad list was projected onto some Australian landmark. It might have been Federation Square. I can't remember which, but Pim Verbeek went through every single selection and explained the justification. He didn't say, "Oh, well, the midfield coach handled this one. That was the goalkeeper's coach." Like, I want some answers, and I feel like, that people were within their rights to be disappointed about that. Another thing that people were quite disappointed about, if for no other reason than sort of lost opportunity, and it's maybe the last point that we'll talk about before we wrap up, because we've gone through the whole squad now, is the fact that Christian Volpato, actually, going to park the Volpato chat for 1 second, because we promised something. Winners and losers from the squad.
Did we? Okay.
Yes. I put Ryan Strain as a big loser. Let's put together 3 people who I think have gotten the best out of this. I mean, I think they're probably right themselves. Quoll, I think, is one of the biggest winners. Cummings, big winner for me. I mean, Bacchus. That would be my 3.
Taken my 3. So what am I meant to say now? I can pick another 3 if you'd like.
Pick one exception. Because Cummings and Quoll, I think, are pretty undeniable.
It's pretty cool for Danny Vukovic.
Great shout.
He wasn't expected to go to the World Cup, but here he is.
Captured the zeitgeist of the conversation. Okay, I'll let you start this time. You have the full 3 losers from this the people who were stiffest to miss out.
Adam Taggart.
Yeah.
Mitch Langerak. And we haven't even mentioned the name of Tom Rogic, but I don't think he's stiff to miss out. I think that's reasonable. So I'm instead going to say,
God, we've missed Tommy, but he just hasn't played enough. No. I don't think I wouldn't use his abrupt departure from the Socceroos squad that never was publicly explained. I wouldn't use that as a stick to beat him with. I just think the match minutes thing just we haven't seen enough from him. I mean, he's played like no more than 20, 30 minutes in a game for West Brom.
I'm saying Adam Taggart, Mitch Langerak, Jason Davidson.
That's a solid 3. I'm going to go Ryan Strain. I am going to throw in Tom Rogic. I also think Marco Tilio is very unlucky. I think he was really, really close, and I think his miss in the game against New Zealand and the sort of narrative around him that created, that how are we going to be taking someone to the World Cup who doesn't have that killer instinct, doesn't finish those chances, how that call-up might have affected his place within the City starting squad to start the opening couple of rounds. I think his confidence has been impacted around the discussion on his national team future. It felt like in quite a few games, even though he has put in some good performances in that time, there were a lot of touches, particularly in the Perth game, that I think were taken with the weight of a looming selection or non-selection on his shoulders. And he was really probably fighting for an impact slot alongside Garang Quoll. And there was one player who felt like there was pressure and burden upon his involvements in game because of the impact. And there was one who I think took that challenge, took that stress in his stride, and that was Quoll. Yep. But I do still think, if it was me, I might have taken them both. But I do think Tilio was unlucky.
Who would you replace Tilio with?
McLaren, but that's too big of a talking point to really.
Okay.
Maybe I also omitted Craig Goodwin from my Socceroos squad that I picked, which kind of just forgot about him, which I feel bad about. I could have taken him as a left back.
And that's right. I'm okay with Craig Goodwin in the sense that I feel like for the very specific circumstances that I expect to see us in at the World Cup, I think Craig Goodwin can contribute meaningfully in those specific set-piece situations, for example.
Completely agree. Well, the other potential loser, or someone who did lose out, was, I suppose, Australia, because Christian Volpato, and this is why I've actively edited the running of the show on the fly, because I think it leads in quite nicely. Some feel as though Australia have lost out because Christian Volpato was apparently named in the initial version or variant of this 26-man squad. He was called 3 separate times yesterday by Graham Arnold. Graham Arnold was told by the Roma starlet, I guess we can call him, that he was thinking about it until the third and final call, like he's selling a house. But rather than agreeing, Christian Volpato told Graham Arnold that he did not want to be selected for the Socceroos World Cup squad.
So who do you think is the individual who has taken Christian Volpato's place? When Graham Arnold says Volpato was in the 26, because that's the real winner in this whole thing, is whoever's managed to take Christian Volpato's spot.
That's a good point. Well, maybe Qual possibly.
I think Qual was going either way.
Maybe he wasn't. You don't know.
He couldn't have not brought Qual.
Trying to think. Maybe McGree?
That's what I thought.
Maybe McGree, maybe Bacchus, and you rely on Devlin and Moy as the 6 options, and you could also put McGree into the 8. I actually think he's much better as an 8. I really don't feel very strongly for McGree as a 10, but that's, as we come towards the end of the hour, probably not a discussion for right now.
Maybe McGree, yeah.
Yeah.
Except McGree's spot felt safe-ish to me.
But there's been a lot of anger about this.
So we're talking about Volpato, yes.
It's been a really divisive issue to cap or not to cap Volpato. I actually think that Arnie has played it perfectly to offer him a place in the squad and put the ball in his court. I think he's played it perfectly. But I also think that Christian Volpato is completely within his rights to make the decision that he's made, and I completely support him.
That's why I think it's ultimately a non-issue when we talk about to cap or not to. Well, it didn't matter. It didn't matter whether or not we wanted to cap Christian Volpato if Christian Volpato didn't want to play for the Socceroos, which, as you say, he is entirely entitled to say.
That's true. But this is the first time we've actually heard something. Well, it hasn't come from Volpato directly, but it hasn't. Graham Arnold. It's come from the horse's mouth through a chain. Yeah. This has been the first time we've actually heard his thoughts and feelings. It's been his words. It hasn't been someone else speaking on his behalf. And so I guess the interesting bit about all this for me is he's decided no, and I think there are different trains of thought that make that decision a very fair one on his behalf for me. But I guess the thing we'd all want to know is why. How much does the whole furor and backlash about his reaction to the Socceroos' defeat to Japan play into it? Is that the reason? Is it the fact that Australia was a youth footballing system that saw him as being not good enough, and only now since he's gone to Italy has his talent been recognised, and does he want to reward the very system that shut him out at some point? Is it because he'd prefer to play for Italy and he thinks there's a legitimate chance? Is it a combination of all three of those things? That is, for me, rather than stressing about whether we've lost out on this huge talent in some people's opinions, or whether or not we should have selected him in the first place or anything like that, I think the why is the most interesting element of all of this.
I appreciate that this is coming from a program in which we've dissected Graham Arnold's favourites chocolate when I talk about reading too far into things.
Yeah.
Nice. I don't think Christian Volpato has thought as deeply as everyone. Sorry, that makes it sound like he was flippant in his decision, which isn't what I mean. I mean to say I don't think that there's some deep-seated, lifelong retribution story or resentment towards Australian football. I think at the end of the day, it comes down to the fact that Christian Volpato is making inroads in Serie A and in Italian football. Consequently, he believes he is capable of eventually cracking into the Italian national team, and playing for the Italian national team carries significantly more weight than playing for the Socceroos. And that's, for me, what it comes down to. That's all I see in this decision. I think Christian Volpato's success this season has reinforced in his mind that that's a realistic goal, and he could well be right.
Yeah.
And so he wants to keep that option open. I don't think it's about the Socceroos, it's about Italy.
And one of the things I have struggled with throughout this whole discussion around Volpato and discourse is a lot of people. look, I don't want to. I think this is a good thing. People are really passionate about the Socceroos. The Socceroos is an immensely strong brand in Australian football. It's one that, unlike the A-League, it permeates through the minds of a lot of people who don't just care about football in this country. There are people who won't watch a game at the A-League, but they're obsessed with the Socceroos when it comes around. I love the fact that we feel so passionately about this national team. I really, really do. But I do think that sometimes that, with the specific respect to this debate, I think sometimes people have just not been able to compute the idea that not everyone feels as passionately or as strongly about this national team and the idea of representing this national team as perhaps others do.
But again, I don't even think it is an indictment on the amount Christian Volpato cares about the Socceroos. I think
no,
that's unfair.
But people see there have been arguments framed around Volpato playing for the Socceroos that if he's selected, like it should be an oath. Like if someone calls you up, if someone asks you to answer the call and it's your home country, it's your duty. But the reality for a lot of people with dual nationalities or heritage from other countries is that it's not necessarily black and white. Like, we assume that you have fealty to the country of your birth, but it's a completely individual thing. Everyone places different meanings on their heritage versus their nationality, and even people who aren't direct descendants. Like, there is so many factors that come into these decisions that not everyone just blindly thinks. I don't want to say, okay, blindly sounds a bit dismissive, but not everyone thinks that playing for the Socceroos is the alpha and omega. And this is especially true of someone who believes they are an actual chance to potentially progress their career with the other nation that they can qualify. They're eligible for.
Right.
And whether or not he actually gets selected for Italy ever, there are rumours that the upcoming November friendlies that Italy will play when the main playing squad might be away on holiday, enjoying some time off because obviously they're not going to the World Cup, might be a time where he's in the frame. Irrespective of what percentage chance he is to actually be selected for that squad, it doesn't matter. How likely he is to be selected does not matter. It is all about whether or not Christian Volpato thinks that what chance he has of being selected for that squad. It doesn't matter whether he's got a 10% chance in reality, if Roberto Mancini sees him as a last resort. It's about whether Volpato, and not just in the next set of friendlies, but over the next decade, because this guy's 18. He could not get selected for the next 2 World Cups, including this one, and be 26 by the time the next one rolls around in the prime of his life. He'll be 22 for the next one. He will be, like, it's so early to have to make this call and lock yourself in when he still doesn't know what he will or won't achieve in football. I think he's completely within his rights to make the decision that he's made. And whether or not he's an actual chance of making that grade, of being an Italian national player, more than a handful of caps, doesn't matter so much as whether he believes he can do that is the important determinant factor. And ultimately, I think that's what's made the decision. I don't think the Snapchat or the Australian football agenda or lack of appreciation has as much to do with it.
I think the bit that you touched on there that for me is the most persuasive or the most relevant is the fact that saying no to the Socceroos in this instance isn't locking Christian Volpato into anything in the same way that saying yes would. No. So to the extent that we discuss, it doesn't matter, or all that matters is the fact or whether or not Christian Volpato believes he can play for the Italian national team. The great news for Christian Volpato is that if that doesn't eventuate, he can still turn around, and if he's one of the best players in the world who's just not getting a look in Italy, it's not like the Socceroos are going to turn around and say, you rejected us then, so go away. Like, we'll say, fine, yes, please come play for us kind of thing. Like, he has left his options open with this rejection decision. I did want to ask you though, when Graham Arnold says he called Christian Volpato 3 times, do you reckon that was more of a, do you want to play for the Socceroos? No. How about now? No. you sure? No. Or was that do you want to play for the Socceroos?
I think the second call
about it?
in between the first and the third was actually, what's your favourite chocolate in the box of favourites?
That's right. That was...
Maybe that was the third. No, maybe that was the third one. It was the first call was, are you sure? No. Are you sure you're sure? No, I'm not playing. Stop calling me Graham. And then the third one, what if I got your favourite chocolate from the box of favourites and just that was available in camp all the time? And then still no.
Volpato set Graham Arnold
now the numbers
trials.
Blocked, yeah.
He was like, you have to, I will play for the Socceroos, but first you must succeed in these 3 tasks. And then he had this elaborate plan drawn. I'm very excited to see what. And one of those plans was for Graham Arnold to correctly guess Christian Volpato's favourite chocolate from the favourites box. And perhaps that's where Graham Arnold fell down.
But this is the thing. We ultimately could go into all of this discussion about whether or not he should play at this World Cup. And there is still a chance that he is selected for the Socceroos in future.
That's right.
We just don't know. But I think we should spend, even if he picks Italy and gets selected for Italy, I just hope that we don't slam him or shun him as a result of that. I think we still should massively celebrate, and I think we've done a poor job of this to an extent with Lyndon Dykes, who I recognise is not at the same level or the same calibre. It's always a disappointment because we are a lower ranked footballing nation and we're constantly looking for any advantage. We're feeding off scraps to the table. We're naturalising Scottish people whose grandmothers were Australian and that sort of stuff. We're going to great lengths to improve this team anywhere we can. I think we can get a bit confrontational to individuals who decide that that's not for them. And I think that's a bit, I don't think that's a very becoming way of approaching these things. I think if Volpato does say, I want nothing to do with Australia at a national team level, I want to play for Italy, we should still, if he goes on to be a superstar, a legend, right? Best case scenario, he's winning multiple Serie A's with, I don't know, Juventus or whatever. I don't really want them to win, but whatever. Let's just use that as an example. He has 100 caps for Italy, right? He goes to the Euros. He goes to the World Cup. Who cares if they win or not, right? Best case scenario. I hope the Australian football fandom is supporting him the whole way throughout that journey because that's what he deserves. He doesn't deserve to be turned away because he didn't appreciate us and we're all deep down quite salty about the missed opportunity and what might have been. Nah. I think that's a pretty ugly look. I think we should support this guy wherever his career goes. And if it just so happens that it doesn't go as well or that he wants to represent the Socceroos or if he ends up playing NPL in 5 years' time, let's not hate on him. I don't think that achieves anything.
I think the most outlandish thing that you said in the last 2 minutes was the way that you very implicitly compared the position of the Scotland national team to the Socceroos to that of the Italian national team relative to the Socceroos.
But there was, they're not on the same level. Yeah,
it's not.
They're
different responses.
Yeah, they are. They're not the same thing. But there were people who were annoyed because it was a time where the striker position was a missing link for Australia. There were people who were annoyed that Lyndon Dykes chose to represent Scotland instead of Australia. There were people who had that train of thought. But I still think we should appreciate, just because they choose to represent a different nationality doesn't make them not Australian.
No, I agree.
It's a global society. People have multiple heritages, multiple ethnicities quite often. It's only going to be a greater problem than a lesser problem. I don't think we should become oppositional about it. I think we should just embrace the fact that Australian players, whether they're Australian because their grandmother was or whether they're Australian because they were born in Cootamundra, we should appreciate them all the same and wish them every success rather than be like, oh, you didn't want to play for the Socceroos, so we don't like you now.
And I agree wholeheartedly with that sentiment. Yeah.
Well, that feels like a nice place to end it on, Oscar. We really have done a deep dive. We've gone all the way from Garang Kuol to Lyndon Dykes. It's quite the jump from a young A-League talent at the start of his career who hasn't even made a start to one who's come through, gone abroad, made the championship and decided he wants to play for a different national team and not even play at the World Cup.
And all the favourites.
And all the favourites in between. Well, if you've enjoyed the Socceroos deep dive or any of the favourites discussion in between, or you've missed any of it, make sure you catch it on the podcast platform. Search Football Nation Radio on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you really enjoy listening to On Demand, really. Oscar and I will be hopefully back here next week at the same time on a Tuesday. We'll start talking about A-League once again. Didn't even get a chance. We went...
just for the week until it goes away, by the way. But yeah, sure.
The penultimate. Yeah, we can still do a bit of penultimate week chat. Maybe even throw some World Cup in the mix. But until that point, we'll say goodbye. We'll also say thank you to the Global Institute of Sport, who are our sponsors on the Oz Football Hour at the moment. If you want to eventually take over, perhaps, from Graham Arnold as national team boss, you can get your Masters of Football Coaching and Analysis done online in 7 days with a few classes at the MCG thrown in as well if you're in Melbourne, or you can just do it all online. So if that's of interest, if you want to become potentially the next Socceroos boss, head to gas.sport/FNR. You might have to compete with Kevin Muscat. Quick congratulations to him for his success with Yokohama. But Masters of Football Coaching and Analysis is the best way to get ahead. And with the 7 days that we've got between now and the next show, Oscar and I may even get ourselves a Masters too. But until that point, until we're fully qualified, goodbye for now. Thanks and success.
Victory looking to build. Barbarouses is quick. Is he in behind Topo Stanley? It doesn't matter! Costa Barbarouses! Wow!
Unbelievable kick from Maria.